car chase initiated, when the protocols for nearly every law enforcement agency in the nation demands that you go up the ranks and notify your superior that you're participating or about to participate in a car chase. And then once the notice is given, then the superior has the option of calling it off or just monitoring and going with it until either it concludes in catching the fleeing citizen or something else occurs. But we haven't heard about the chain of command. How far up did the immediate notice go of the car chase? How far up did the notice go that there had been a violent encounter and there was an individual being transported to the hospital? How far up did it go? We don't know. The only thing we got quick turnaround on, a quick response on, was 5 officers out of 9 or 10 who we know were on the scene who received administrative discipline. There's more to the story, and I think that the citizens of Memphis and Shelby County deserve to know the whole story as soon as possible. You can't have an effective law enforcement agency operating in Memphis, Tennessee, and Shelby County unless you have the trust of Memphians and Shelby Countyans. You can't get the trust of Memphians and Shelby Countyans unless you're truthful, and you can't be truthful if you're not transparent. So those are the 3 T's that we need to remember. You got to tell the truth, you got to be transparent if you want the trust of the citizens. And the only way that you're going to be an effective law enforcement agency is to have the cooperation and trust of the citizens. Now there's one other letter that we need to speak to, and that's that R. Just a reminder to all of our citizens that we showed and led the way yesterday on how to conduct ourselves in spite of this horrendous, horrid tragedy that we're protesting. So we want to continue that. We want that R for respect. We want to respect the wishes of the family. We want to respect the memory of young Tyre Nichols, and we want to exercise our rights in a way that is responsible. So with that, I'll come back later for questions if necessary.
In just a moment, I'm going to have my leader to come up and talk just briefly about potential legislation. They drove in from Nashville for this particular important press conference. I think also we need to mention that there were 10 people, officers as I understand, that were present. And with there being 10 people present, I don't know how their involvement was, but we need to look into that as well. But also, there is responsibility when you see your colleague doing wrong, you need to get involved and stop it. Shouldn't be 10 people allowing 5 people to slaughter somebody in front of their face. You couldn't do that with me if I was an officer. You know, no weapon, 140 pounds, wet, okay, already subdued. So somebody should have stepped in and told him that's enough. Cuff the man and put him in the car and let that be it. Okay, you can't stand around, and that's aiding and abetting in my mind. Okay, however, I'm not saying what the circumstances were, how far they were, how close they were, but I think that needs to be looked into. Okay, because had it stopped halfway through, the young man would probably be alive. I'm sure he would be alive, and that's just not good. We can't let our colleagues go off and go renegade and do things they should and ought not do that causes extreme harm. Come back from a you know, a whipping, but you can't come back from death. Stop it. You know, broken leg is not terminal. That's not final. Okay, so we want to encourage that there's their involvement when there are cases like that, they get in and get in quickly. Now, if you don't mind, Chairman John Ray, just for a hot second, you coming at my request, okay? Now, he's one of our leaders because we're going to look at possibly legislation, so I want him to just talk about that being the leader. Introduce yourself, if you don't mind, sir.
Thank you, Representative Towns, Representative Hardaway. First of all, let me just say what an honor it is to be in this historic venue with the men and women of AFSCME who literally make this city run. Memphis is the most beautiful city in the state of Tennessee, and unfortunately we're here to mourn the ugliest of tragedies. And so I just want to say, send again, on behalf of everyone, especially the Democratic Caucus, that we send our hearts and our prayers from across the entire state of Tennessee, as well as the nation, to lift up the family of Mr. Tyre Nichols. As a father of 3 young boys, I can't fathom being this young man's mother or parents in this situation. As a direct result of this, we will continue to follow the lead, Representative Hardaway, Representative Towns, and other members of the Democratic Caucus from this community, and we will be introducing legislation. And first let me say it's truly unfortunate that legislation is required, that we would need to legislate humanity in 2023. We have a long way to go to reach that mountaintop. We will continue to introduce legislative initiatives to that end. I will be assisting my colleagues in this endeavor, and so you will see, again, from Tennessee Democrats, legislation to try to prevent this type of thing from happening in the future. So some of the topics that have been discussed, again, we continue to battle and address the need for implicit bias training among police officials across the state. We have seen in the past police officers or law enforcement be terminated for calls from one department in one city only to go to another city. That needs to stop. We have many different ways that we need to evaluate to address this issue. Again, it's truly unfortunate that this is even necessary, but as always, I will be following the leadership of my colleagues here in this endeavor, and once again, Democrats will be leading the charge on these very important issues. So thank you again for allowing me to join you this morning.
Thank you, sir. Now, finally, I want to emphasize, we're going to open up for questions, emphasize how proud we are of the police director, how quickly they investigated and analyzed the data and terminated those guys that were on the force at that time. Right after that, just how quickly the Attorney General's office responded with the indictments. I think that has a lot to do with showing and settling the nerve and quieting the anger in this community, because it was done very quickly. Within 2 weeks, that was done. That's very important. I think Ben Crump, our good friend Ben Crump, has said that Tennessee, meaning Memphis, Tennessee at this point, is real exemplary and should be used as a model of how to respond. Unfortunately, these things will happen again. We think how to respond. Memphis is exemplary. It's a model of how they should handle this kind of infraction of a citizen's right, and that, especially ends up in murder or death. So Memphis should be held in high esteem for that, but it's our director and our leader at the AG's office. And, it's something that hopefully we can continue. But under no stretch of the imagination does that conclude the matter. We want justice for this family. No ifs, ands, and buts, no substitutes. We want justice for this family, and we want it swiftly for this family. We want justice. We want and demand justice. And as I said, it doesn't matter about the ethnicity or color, of the people that perpetrate or violate. We want justice. No substitute. We're not going to tolerate it. It's just that simple. Now we're going to open up to see if you all have any questions. Yes, ma'am.
When you talk about swift action, how soon could we see legislation here in Tennessee on the books?
Well, our session just started. We just restarted, So we actually, if we're able and successful in being able to do something, you have to understand now, Democrats, we're only 24 of the 99. But we could see it actually by the conclusion of the session, which is like 3 or 4 months. We could actually see something if we're able to do and pass on both sides of the House. I hope that, you know, our people in the General Assembly are sensitized to what's going on and will work with us. And I think that they will if it's presented in the right way. But we could actually see something in April or May. We really could.
You talked about 24 out of 99 here in Tennessee. It is hard for Democrats to get legislation through. Are you concerned that with this, it won't happen? Or do you think because of the nature of the case, like you said, it would?
Well, let me tell you what I see. This thing is so egregious. What helps us, I believe, is the footage. How can you look at that footage and not want to do something? It's there in not black and white, it's there in color, okay? This is going around the country. I was having luncheon meeting yesterday with a guy that's out of Europe. This is all over in Europe. His wife called him and asking what is going on in Memphis, okay? It's everywhere. The president has contacted his family, offering condolences and so forth. So you would be hard-pressed to look at this footage and see what happened to that young man, okay, and not try to do something. If a dog in this country was beaten like that, what the hell would happen? You all know what would happen. Ask Michael Vick, okay? If a dog is beaten like that, somebody's going to jail. Now, you got a man that's dead. So that's something somebody else has to explain. I'm not saying we won't be able to do it. I think we will, because I've been able to do certain things, and I've been there long enough. We have a relationship. Hopefully we can get things done on both sides of the aisle, because this is definitely not partisan. It's not anti-police, because we do, as I say, have friends and family that we love, but it's about making sure that we do it right and making sure we take care of a man that really didn't do anything. They hadn't even validated a violation of a traffic stop from what the police director is saying. So I think we will. Next question. Any colleagues want to jump in?
respond to that? Yeah.
Sure. Help yourself. Come in.
And as my colleague said, we'll be preparing bills, and we actually have a bill filing deadline of Tuesday. So the bills that will go forward will be filed by Tuesday. One such bill will deal with the mental health care for law enforcement officers. We want to make sure that when you're hired, that you have had a psychological evaluation and that you're suited for this job and the job is suited to you. We also want to look at establishing annual mental health evaluations so that we can do what? So that we can catch the problem before it becomes the problem of the law enforcement employee, before it becomes a problem for a citizen out in the streets. We also are contemplating whether it makes sense to have random mental health checkups. So you would come in the morning and roll call, and instead of going out on your duty, then you would go to the counselor, to the psychologist, psychiatrist, and get your checkup. So we've got that, and we've got some other things in place that we're working on, but I think that's one of the most significant. And we're also looking at the issue of whether these untrustworthy individuals, those who lie but might not receive but might not receive any firm, definable discipline, whether when those guys end up in court, whether that information needs to be divulged to the defense. So we're talking about revisiting the Brady rule.
Chairman, you got anything? Okay. Next question.
Can you elaborate on the importance of protesting? You talked about it's important that police protest after situations like this. Tell us why that's important.
All right, listen. This country, we know the history of this country to a large degree. All right, even though we didn't get it taught to us like we should have in high school, elementary school. protest has changed this country. This building here, this union here, a large part of what made it a significant union around the world is because Dr. King and the members like this gentleman right here had to get out and protest for the rights. The thing about freedom and the thing about rights is that you cannot figure that once you achieve those rights, like freedom around the world, that they're going to be maintained, because there comes somebody with these old crazy ideas that try to take them away, and so you got to stand up and protest for them. That's something we should never lose in this country, the right to protest and assemble. If you do, what happens, there's a groundswell that bubbles up and erupts to something that's not really good. People always need to be able to express themselves, whether they agree with me or not. That's your constitutional right, and we need to do it. That's an expression that Americans have, and we don't need to lose it at any cost. Always exercise your right to protest. Now, sometimes things get a little rough, because the circumstances are a little rough. But under this circumstance, we are calling for, we're going to do what Mama said. Mama said she wants peace, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to give her peace. We're going to protest, but we're going to give Mama peace. She needs no more anguish. The Wells need no more anguish. Mr. Nichols' family needs no more anguish, but we want to protest. Because we don't want, on the end of circumstance, people to think that this is okay. This is not okay. What has happened is not okay. Come on, sir.
The City of Memphis City Council introduced 8 can't wait a couple of years ago, and they say that is part of the reason the officers were arrested so quickly, because they violated some of those 8 can't wait rules. Is that something that could be put on a broader level, or from a state level, that all officers have to follow those rules that they do their job?
That's a part of what I believe ought to come out of this when we introduce legislation. Okay, part of the problem with our communities is when there's something like that happens somewhere in the country, okay, there's a sandbagging. The citizens don't get the information in due time. The tape gets lost. The tape is modified. There's no transparency. When you do those kinds of things, what happens is people begin to doubt, especially when there are no indictments over an extended period of time, 20 years, 40 years, 50 years. When you change it and do what we did today, what that does, that calms the nerve, that settles down the anger, that lets people figure that you're gonna, we can get justice at the end of the day. People want justice. They don't want any more than that. Just fair treatment, just justice. So these are excellent maneuvers that have taken place. And yes, it needs to be something that we could actually stretch across the state. We should. Okay, the circumstances are the same. We should. That law or that application, if we made it a law, that application would soothe the heartbreak, the anger, okay, the frustration. I think it's a great idea. You want to say anything, sir?
No.
Okay.
Yes, thank
Go
you. When we look at policy, we know that policy is only as good as the personnel or the people who execute it or carry it out. So we're back to the hiring practices and the management of the personnel who you've hired. So I would say that it doesn't matter what policy we put in place if we're hiring the wrong people. If we're lowering the bar and taking individuals into law enforcement who otherwise would not wear a badge, then we've got to revisit that. These are folks who we are giving permission at their discretion to take your liberty or your life. We've got to do a better job of deciding who has that authority. So yes, we're going to revisit the policies of the department. We're going to sit down with our city councilmen, and we're going to sit down with our county commissioners and talk about policy. We're going to talk about funding, who needs to kick in more dollars so that we can hire the right kind of people. We're going to talk about that. But overall, the state has a constitutional responsibility for the safety of its citizens. So the great state of Tennessee has got to give us some money so that we can help the citizens who live here, help the citizens, the tourists who come to play here, and those who work here.
And that includes making sure the guys get a raise, because police officers don't make enough money. They should be paid far more money than what they receive. You got another one, sir?
I just wanted to ask you all, after how this
course, that's a loaded question, man. Okay, of course, that has nothing to do with Chief Davis. Chief Davis didn't go out and do that. These cats are 24 years old to 32. They know better. That has no reflection of Chief Davis or many of the officers that are there. She's the one who gave us swift action. She's the one who terminated that bad behavior. Has nothing to do. She just got here. What, 18 months? She's been here that long. These problems are across the country, and they're systemic throughout our forces across the state sometimes, okay? Has no reflection on her. Let that be emphatically stressed. Yes, I support the chief. Absolutely, 100%. No diversion, no backing up, no moonwalking on it. She is doing her job from what I see right now, okay? Next question.
Well,
Come
I
on.
mean,
Come on.
we might not be completely on the same page on this. I support the chief, but I think that our scrutiny needs to go all the way up to the C-suite in City Hall. The policies, especially when you have the kind of policies that create these type of special units, are getting authorized at the top of the pyramid. So I'm going to hold and not render an opinion at this time, but everyone in the Memphis Police Department needs to be looked at, and we need that patterns of and practices review by the Department of Justice. I'd love to see the Memphis Police Department do it voluntarily, but we need it. So we don't need to pay a consultant to come into the Memphis Police Department and tell them what's wrong. We need for the Department of Justice to do its job and evaluate the patterns and practices which they probably already have far too many files on the Memphis Police Department, and some aren't that old, just a few years old. But we need that in order to ensure, going back to the T's, and that's truth, transparency. We've got to have that if we're going to have trust. And I think it's going to take someone with the arm's length of the Department of Justice. You can't pay a consultant to come in and tell you everything that's wrong with your company. If some of that involves your failures, I just don't trust having MPD pay a consultant to come in and tell us what's wrong from top to bottom. I don't think we're going to get a clear and honest story on that. I want the Department of Justice to come in and do patterns and practices review of the Memphis Police Department.
Yes, ma'am.
Just a follow-up question to that. What is, we heard your message to the family. What's your message to those 5 officers that are now bonded out at home, other officers that are under investigation, EMC officials, and just officers around the world, as you say, who have their eyes on the city of Memphis right now?
Well, I mean, you have empathy for anybody even when they run afoul of the law. Even though those people we think are running afoul of the law, you still have compassion. I have compassion for human beings. You know, at this point, what we have to do is let the system work, and we pray for them like we do the other families, okay? It's a heartbreaking situation. There's no pleasure in any of this at all. There's losers on all sides. It's sad, but what really breaks my heart is the fact they were so young, and they know that those are the kinds of things that other young African-American men experience in the community. Okay, but still, there again, you know, if that was my friend or my cousin or my brother, this and other, I have the same concern for that particular human being, even though they've done something bad, okay? That's what you call being a human being, you know? So we have to pray for them too. It's not one-sided. It's not unilateral. Next question. Yes, sir.
You mentioned more questions and answers earlier about the unit, about circumstances of how this happened, things like that. When are you expecting to get those answers?
Well, let's restate it. Let me make sure I understand you. Say it again, please.
You mentioned questions about the unit, about the circumstances of how this happened.
Right.
You mentioned pushing for those answers. I know it may take a little bit of time. When are you expecting to hear this?
Well, these things, first thing I would have to do is the things that I have suggested here, we make sure that Steve Morrow, the Attorney General, gets those things. And, you know, obviously we can't dictate to them. You want it to be thorough and let it run the process. I wouldn't put a time limit on their office. But he knows as they expedite it, this particular deal, they'll do it in a respectful manner. They got to analyze it. That's not my job to go in and research, but I have to pose and ask them to look into these kinds of things. There could be something there. There may not be anything there. I don't know. It just sounds fishy and kind of peculiar. It's just something that does not sit right in the good old gut, you know. So if they can figure it out, they give us some feedback on it, hey, sometime reasonably, and I'm sure he will. It's not like he doesn't have enough on his plate right now. But, I can't put a time frame on it. But, I'm not talking about a year, 6 months, nothing like that. Okay, I'm sorry. Next question. I thought I saw another hand. Yes, sir.
A lot of incidents start with traffic stops. In your opinion, should the police be involved in making traffic stops fail?
Well, look, that question has come up. I think that the time could be better utilized. We have about 600, I think, 50 people, cops, officers short, okay? And there's real crime going on in our city, like there is in other cities. If that could be re-looked at and we have those traffic cops to deal with those particular kinds of things, and our officers are able to deal with the more urgent, more serious things, that may help. We still got to get the complement up. We still got to get that 650 or 500, whatever it is, up. But I think it would be better, and they're trained different. I think it would be a better use of their time. There again, I would be open to see what, the chief and the union and all those people say about it. But still, I'd rather see them out policing, dealing with gangs, and dealing with drugs, and dealing with, homicides, and dealing with, domestic violence, that kind of stuff. I really would rather see that. That's just personally off the cuff without analyzing it, I think it'd be better use of their time, Come on.
And I agree with my colleague, and we're actually working on legislation which will refocus our energies from merely dealing with de-escalation techniques and move us into non-escalation techniques. Some of that will be about how you talk, how you posture when you're interacting in the field. Critical part of that is just what Chairman Towns talked about, and that's whether we need to make all of these traffic stops that we're making. So we need to collect data, analyze it, and make a decision on whether the chances of violence and thus the chances of injury or death to both the citizen and to our law enforcement officers, whether that's justified for the effectiveness of these random stops. And when we do the stops, do we have to take folks to jail for non-violent offenses? I would suggest to you, no. And the arrest procedure is another point where we seem to have violent encounters between the citizens and the law enforcement in the field. So I'm with my colleague on that. We've got to move ahead and take that next step and advance the discussion past de-escalation into non-escalation techniques. If you don't get to the escalation point, ain't nothing to de-escalate.
Many of the traffic stops should result in just a ticket, if anything. I mean, you don't want your high-paid officers to say we got them a raise out being responsible for tickets. That's like a tariff, raising taxes with ticket. And some of these municipalities, they do it when you drive through there. You don't want that. Their time could be better utilized, I think, and more effective for us as citizens when you got real problems in our community. Next question. We'll take two more. And I know it's a Saturday. I want you guys to like us after it's over. I'm going to take the whole Saturday, Is that it? Okay. Thank you all for coming. As again, hey,
Thank you,
sadly,
everyone.
out of these circumstances, but, thank you all very much.
Did y'all have anything, Daniel?
I don't think you guys.
Well, we do have additional comment from labor.
Okay. The women said no.
Oh. Okay, give me just a second. Harder one. Yes.
Hold on, guys, okay.